ladies and gentlemen, the President of the Illinois Senate, Emil Jones. Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Jay, and good afternoon to all of you. It is my pleasure today to introduce our senior senator from Illinois, Richard Durbin. Senator Durbin was first elected by his fellow Democrats in the Senate in December of 2004 to the second highest ranking Democratic leadership post. Durbin's election as the Democratic whip will mark only the fifth time in the history of the state of Illinois that we had a person with such ranking in the Illinois Senate. He began his public career as a parliamentarian in the Illinois Senate. A few years later, he took on an entrenched, well-respected incumbent and surprised the establishment by winning a seat in the Illinois House. Senator Durbin is the only Illinois senator who has held such high ranking. In his initial start in Congress, he wanted to let everyone know very early on that he was not just going to be another senator, another congressman. He took on the tobacco giants, the airlines, and also fought hard and got legislation passed to ban smoking on commercial airlines. Senator Durbin has also made his mark as a great leader in the healthcare area. He has promoted organ and tissue donations, worked to pass family leave legislation, and more recently, Senator Durbin proposed a plan to give small businesses some affordable choices as relate to private healthcare insurance plans and expand access to coverage for their employees. He has fought to pass responsible gun safety legislation to keep guns out of the hands of children and introduce bipartisan legislation to hold adults responsible if they fail to properly store their guns away and keep them away from children who could use the guns to kill and maim other individuals. Senator Durbin has worked with the AFT, that's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and local law enforcement agencies to launch initiatives to help Illinois become the first state to volunteer and trace every gun that's used in the commission of a crime. Always ahead of the curve, Senator Durbin worked for years to promote ethanol use in this country, and especially in the state of Illinois. In 1998, he secured passage of a provision to extend the ethanol tax incentive from 2007 to the year 2000. In 2000, he worked with others, members of the Illinois delegation, for funding for the construction of ethanol research pilot program here in the great state of Illinois, and funding for that is at SIU University. We can go on and on about our senior senator. That tongue twister, Don Clark Netch. Our senior senator from Illinois. He's one that's well respected by his colleagues in Washington. He's out front on many key issues. I give to you now, let's give him a warm welcome, Senator Dick Durbin.
I'm sorry it took so long to get up here, but my advancing years. It is great to be back home. And I thank the City Club and Jay Doherty and all of you and Professor Paul Green and everyone gathered here. I think it's important that members of the Senate take time away from Washington and come home, and I recommend to them that a stop that you ought to make when you're coming home is to visit with school children. About 3 weeks ago, I was at a local Chicago school that has a summer feeding program. There's a little day camp there, and they give the kids a little breakfast and a little lunch. And so I came in with a few cameras and reporters, and I sat down at this table with all of these first graders. There were about 6 of them at the table. They were eating their lunch, and I kind of came in the room, and all these reporters followed me in. And I sat down at the table. And they stopped eating, and this one boy looked up to me and he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Dick Durbin." And he said, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a United States Senator." And a little girl at the table said, "Well, good for you." And then another little boy at the table said, "Are you famous?" And I said, "Well, who do you think is famous?" He said, "George Bush is famous." I said, "I'm not famous." And then this little fella next to me said, "Are you on TV?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "What's the weather going to be?" So it's a humbling experience. I've got to recount one quick story because of Emil Jones, my buddy. It's about the state Senate. For 14 years, I served as parliamentarian of the Illinois State Senate. I played the role of Edgar Bergen. I would stand next to all of these state senators and never, ever be able to speak a word into the microphone. I would lean over and whisper in their ears, giving them advice, I hope good advice. And my only control over the situation was a toggle switch, which was on the podium. And it was a switch that turned the microphone of the presiding officer on and off. So if there was some really important and delicate confidential information to be given, of course, I'd turn the microphone off and speak to them, turn it back on. The day came when then President Cecil Partee, a great friend of mine and a terrific man, said to me that he was leaving and he was going to be taking off for Chicago, and I had to stay right there as they went through second readings, Emil. And he was going to ask Senator Danny Doherty to come up and preside. Remember him, Don? Yes. Danny Doherty was a great fella, a very humble and quiet man who had never presided over the Senate. And Partee said, "That's the end of it. Today's the day he's going to preside. Nothing's going on at second reading. You stay right here next to him because he's nervous as can be. He doesn't want to do it, but I'm going to make him do it." So Partee leads him up to the podium, takes off. And they start the second reading. The clerk, secretary's reading bill after bill after bill, and a few senators are out there. And all of a sudden, a Republican senator stands up and says, "Mr. President, point of order. I object to the reading of this bill. This is out of violation of the rules, and we got to stop the reading right now, and I demand a roll call." At which point, Doherty freezes. I turn the toggle switch off on the microphone, and I lean over to Senator Doherty, and I said, "Don't pay any attention to him. Just listen to me. He's right. And under the rules, he should prevail. And we should have a roll call. But all the Democratic senators have gone home. And we're going to lose this roll call. And we'll never be able to explain it to Cecil Partee. So what you've got to do is bang the gavel, rule him out of order, and go to the next bill." I said, "Okay." He turned the switch on and he said, "He's right. Under the rules, we should prevail, and we should take a roll call, but I could never explain that to Senator Partee because we'd lose, so I'm just going to bang the gavel and go on." Well, it was my favorite moment in 14 years. I want to talk about an issue today that affects every single one of us in the future of this country, and it's one that is very topical. In every race, congressional and Senate race across the United States, there is one consuming issue: the price of gasoline, the issue of energy. Everywhere you go, people are looking at gasoline stations to find out, is that price up to $3? Is it down to $2.65? As I was driving around in the Chicago region yesterday, my staff was noting gasoline pricing signs as we went from town to town, comparing one for the other and wishing they'd filled up at the cheaper gas station pump. It's a national debate and a national issue of great importance to us, and I'd like to spend a few minutes with you before we open it to questions just to make some observations about where we are looking at this from a national perspective. America's energy system is broken today. We need to change it, and let me give you a few reasons why. First, we are funding both sides of the war on terrorism. Every day, the United States spends more than $390 million on foreign oil. Half of that money goes to OPEC, and a quarter of it goes to the Persian Gulf. We're funding our own military to fight extremists, and we're funding the regimes in many countries that are supporting those extremists. Number two, and this is a point made by Tom Friedman of the New York Times, what he calls petro-authoritarianism. From the Middle East to Africa to Venezuela and South America, much of the world's oil reserves are under the control of anti-democratic regimes that don't mean us well. If we don't want these regimes to control our future, we have to break our addiction to oil, as the President suggested in his State of the Union address. Third point, there are 3 billion new customers in China and India who are about to step onto the world stage. They all aspire to our American lifestyle. They want a car, they want a dishwasher, washer, dryer, TV, air conditioning. It's all going to dramatically increase world energy consumption. If you think gasoline is expensive now, wait until there are 3 billion more customers. Finally, we're nearing the tipping point on global warming. The polar ice caps are melting. The seas are heating up. Weather is changing. There's a growing consensus among scientists that we have very little time, maybe only a decade or more, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or our environment is going to suffer serious and possibly irreversible harm. If you haven't seen Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, I encourage you to see it. You may not agree with it, but you ought to hear his point of view and you ought to think about this issue. I think he makes a compelling scientific argument that we need to do something and do it quickly. Whether Katrina was the result of global warming may never be clear, but scientists agree that more frequent storms like Katrina will be one of the consequences if we don't start reversing this trend. And if you think this is just the prattling of tree huggers, understand that the insurance industry in America has now announced that it's going to stop writing property insurance in many of the Gulf Coast port facilities. A CEO of a major defense contractor in America came to see me and told me that he is going to have to self-insure very soon for extremely expensive and large port facilities that are part of our national defense. He can't buy regular insurance in the market. Now, because of these developments, liberals and conservatives and red states and blue are coming to the same conclusion. We need to find new sources of energy that are reliable, and we need to reduce global warming. We need to stop donating so much of America's income to big oil and to Middle East oil sheiks and invest more in clean, renewable energy sources like ethanol, wind, and solar power, energy sources that are homegrown. And we need to increase our energy efficiency. New coalitions are starting to form, and that's, I think, encouraging. They run the gamut from environmentalists to national security and defense hawks, from business leaders to Christian evangelicals. This week's Time magazine quotes unnamed Bush administration officials as saying the White House is formulating a new energy initiative designed to, quote, change the whole nature of the discussion, close quote. I welcome it. This White House advisor said if President Nixon could go to China, only Bush and Cheney, he said, 2 oil men, could bring on all these parties kicking and screaming to the table to talk about our energy future. The White House had a chance a year ago, and Congress worked with the White House to pass an energy policy which really was deficient in many respects. It unfortunately provided massive subsidies to oil companies that are already experiencing record-breaking profits. It did a few good things. It included the first national renewable fuel standard, authorized new tax credits for energy conservation, new energy R&D, and some renewable energy sources. But it failed in the most fundamental thing that we need to do as a nation if we're serious about a new energy policy. 60% of the oil that we import, we burn in our cars and trucks. And unless and until we start talking about better fuel economy and better fuel efficiency, this discussion is almost pointless. Keep in mind, we used to fear red China. As Tom Friedman says, we should start fearing green China. Do you know that the energy standards and the fuel efficiency standards in China today are higher than they are in the United States? They see the future. We need to see it as well. If we could raise, just to give you an example, in the United States, the CAFE standard for cars is 27.5 miles per gallon. We've got the truck loophole, the SUV loophole, but that's the standard for cars. It's been the same for 21 years. We haven't changed this for 21 years. The combined average for all U.S. vehicles is 25 miles per gallon, and it's going down as we buy larger and more fuel inefficient automobiles. By raising the fuel economy standard, just 2.7 miles per gallon, we would save as much oil as we import from the Persian Gulf. Think about that. A 10% increase in fuel efficiency in our cars and trucks, and we could start walking away from this dependency on the Middle East. Now, I've introduced 3 amendments in the last 4 years to raise CAFE standards. I've had my ears pinned back 3 different times. I'm fighting a losing battle, at least to this point, against the administration, many of my colleagues in Congress on both sides of the aisle, the oil companies, and Detroit. The White House and the big 3 automakers claim that raising fuel economy standards would hurt the United States economy. But look what's happening to our economy. Ford Motor Company, a company that is an important part of our economy here in Chicago and around the Midwest, around the world, has announced that its plants in Chicago and 8 other cities are going to be closed this week, and they're going to cut production 20% for the rest of this year. Why? Because with gasoline at $3 a gallon, people aren't buying what they're making. It's just that basic. And just to give you a contrast, Toyota announces that they are going to put on the market a hybrid Camry. The waiting list to buy it is 10 months long. Second, the new Energy Act failed to tackle global warming in any substantive way. We had a good bipartisan amendment. John McCain, Joe Lieberman came forward to move us in this direction. It failed, and it's a shame that it did. The Senate version of the energy bill included a provision requiring the president to reduce U.S. oil consumption by 1 million gallons a day by the year 2015, far less than what we would achieve with a meaningful CAFE standard. And finally, as I mentioned, this bill provided billions of dollars in subsidies to the oil companies that are already experiencing record-breaking profits, record-breaking in the history of American business. It just didn't make any sense. When the president signed the new energy bill, the year since, we've seen gas prices go up 33% to $3 a gallon and more. Energy consumption remains at record high. Oil imports are up. And as I said, oil company profits are at an all-time high. The new budget from the administration doesn't include investment in what I think is critical for our energy future. The president's energy budget for the next year cuts some of the programs we desperately need, programs for energy efficiency, R&D on new energy sources and biofuels. It even cuts the Energy Star program that helps consumers choose energy-efficient products. Now, even though there's some disappointing news in terms of Washington, it is amazing what's going on in states and cities across America. Cities and states are giving up hope, I'm afraid, that Washington is ever going to get this right. And they've started to move on their own. Just last week, Governor Blagojevich announced a very ambitious plan to try to move Illinois forward when it comes to energy efficiency. I've seen some people who are skeptical of it say, wait a minute, how can one state make a difference? Think back for a second. Do you remember 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when California decided that they would demand new technology in automobiles when it came to pollution? And the company said, wait a minute, we just can't make a car for California, but they had to. And what it did, of course, was initiate a program in California that reduced energy consumption, brought more efficiency, reduced pollution, and their economy still grew by national standards. So states can make a difference. It isn't just Governor Blagojevich. Governor Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, is thinking ahead as well. He has an ambitious plan to cut California's greenhouse gas emissions 80% over the next 45 years. Last month, he sat down with Prime Minister Blair, and they decided to have a joint agreement between California and Great Britain to share clean air technology and research. They're exploring the possibility of trading carbon dioxide credits across the Atlantic. The same week that Governor Schwarzenegger and Tony Blair shook hands, former President Bill Clinton launched an effort with 22 of the world's largest cities, including Chicago, to cut their greenhouse gas emissions to Kyoto levels. The same Kyoto Treaty, which was rejected 6 years ago by this administration, is now being adopted city by city and locale by locale instead of being adopted by the United States on a national basis. Chicago was an early supporter of the historic U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement. Member cities agree to voluntarily meet the Kyoto targets for greenhouse gas reduction. So far, 284 mayors representing 49 million Americans have signed on. In addition, in Illinois to Chicago, Highland Park, Schaumburg, Waukegan, and Carroll Springs have all endorsed this agreement. And let me give a word of praise and thanks to Mayor Daley for his leadership on this. Businesses are embracing the challenge of clean energy too, and one of the reasons is that because Mayor Daley and the business community have achieved quite a bit here. More than a century ago, Chicago defined architecture for the world with the introduction of the skyscraper. Today, Chicago is putting up the most energy efficient and environmentally friendly municipal buildings in the United States of America, providing developers with faster permits if they agree to build green. The New York Times said this in a recent article: Chicago has become the global model for how a metropolis can pursue environmental goals to achieve economic success. I'm going to tell this story that I think is also indicative of what may be happening in other parts of the state. I went to my friends in Exelon to verify it, and they weren't sure, so I'm going to tell it anyway because it's a pretty good story. If you drive south from Rockford, and you're heading south through a little town called Paw Paw, Illinois, you almost want to pull off the road immediately. Why? Because you look up, and there above those big old corn and soybean fields are 40 wind turbines, all lined up, put there by a Spanish developer. You stop at the local farm right next to it, and there's a proud farmer who's getting a check every month for the easement to put those wind turbines in his backyard, who can't wait to point out to you where they are and how big they are and how much they turn and what they generate. And so I explored it a little more and asked, why in the world did they build these? They built these because the mayor of the city of Chicago said that Exelon, to provide electricity to city facilities, had to have a certain percentage of renewable energy as part of it. And so they were built into the grid to be meeting that obligation. So when I ran into the mayor of Chicago one day as we were going around, I said, been to Paw Paw lately? And he said, what is Paw Paw? And I said, well, you have changed that town forever and you may not know it. But it's an indication of one mayor's determination and the impact it can have. I can take some pride in my hometown as well. Mayor Tim Davlin last month entered into agreement, the City of Springfield and the Sierra Club, the first agreement in the United States by any city or utility to significantly reduce global warming pollution. That's right, downstate, Springfield, Illinois. Instead of fighting each other in court for years, they came to an agreement. Springfield City Water, Light, and Power worked out an agreement where they're going to replace one of the dirtiest coal-fired plants in the state with one of the cleanest. The new plant will be subject to the strictest standards. In addition, they agreed to double Illinois' wind power capacity by adding a record 120 megawatts of new wind turbines. Half of that energy, Emil, is going to be used to power state buildings, including the Capitol. There's also a new project that President Bush has initiated that I think is a wonderful idea. It's called Future Gen. We're going to try to figure out how to take all this coal in Illinois. 65% of the land mass of Illinois that we're on is sitting over coal reserves, and we can't use them. The coal's too dirty. We're worried about sulfur dioxide, and we're worried about the problems that we might run into with carbon dioxide. Future Gen has been announced by the administration in Washington as a model plant to prove you can generate electricity with zero emissions, zero. That means capturing the carbon dioxide underground. There are 4 finalists. 2 of them are in Illinois, Tuscola and Mattoon. That's the good news. The bad news, the other 2 are in Texas. But we're still in competition, and we believe that we can win this competition. So we're going to be working hard to try to make that happen. A lot of businesses are moving ahead. We've seen some innovations, a long list of them. I could give you a list of the businesses just in the Chicagoland area that are looking for innovation and new technology. We ought to be looking at this as a positive, an opportunity for us to once again lead the world as we did with the computers. We can be, I think, the beacon for the world when it comes to this new energy efficiency. It'll create new businesses, new profitability, and new jobs, and there's no reason to wait behind. And Walmart's been taking a beating lately, as you know, in this city and around the country. And I've been one of those in that chorus because some of the things they do I don't agree with. But I do want to applaud the decision by Walmart that they recently made as the largest retailer in the United States. They have set a goal of increasing vehicle fuel efficiency by 25% in 3 years and doubling their fuel efficiency in 10 years, eliminating 30% of the electricity that they use and reducing their solid waste by 25% over the next 3 years. In fact, they went so far as to invite Al Gore to come down to Bentonville, Arkansas and make his presentation. So I salute them and all the businesses that are accepting this corporate responsibility. But let me close by saying this. Despite all of the things I pointed to, the state efforts, the city efforts, the business efforts, we need a national plan. We need a national energy plan that sets a vision. that says we'll reduce our dependence on foreign oil by 40% over the next 20 years, that provides incentives to businesses that are going to do the right things in terms of energy efficiency, that rewards those businesses that actually achieve these things, that create new jobs in the process. That, to me, is part of the vision and leadership which we need as a country. For many years, the Statue of Liberty was illuminated by a coal-fired facility that generated the electricity to light up the Statue of Liberty. That day has changed. It's now a wind-powered facility that's providing the electricity for the Statue of Liberty, pointing the way again for America's future. Thank you very much.
If you want to ask the senator a question, line up by the microphone. Don't all move at once.
Be respectful of my age now. Go ahead.
One rule, actually two rules. You have to say who you are and who you represent, then sandbagging's okay. Number two, 25, Berkowitz, are you hearing this? 25 seconds per question. No speeches.
Senator Durbin, my name is Karen Hayes. I'm with Concerned Women for America here in Illinois. And I've come to ask you for your reconsideration and help on getting the Child Custody Protection Act to the President's desk. As you know, it's an important bipartisan bill that tries to address the problem of adults bringing minor daughters across state lines to evade their parental involvement laws. We really need this. It's passed both houses, but it's delayed now from going to conference committee. Can you help us?
I think we can, if we can reach an agreement. There was a very serious flaw in this bill as it was introduced. And here's what it basically said. If you live in a state which requires parental notification or consent for a minor to have an abortion procedure, and you as an adult take that minor across state lines where there is no parental consent requirement, then you would be subject to imprisonment, a criminal penalty, for taking the minor across. And secondly, you could be sued in a civil lawsuit by the parents for having taken the child across the state line. Sounds okay when I just describe it. Now, what about the abusive parent who has been guilty of incest, who is now given the right of filing a civil lawsuit against the grandmother who takes the daughter across the state line? So we introduced an amendment and said, surely you didn't want to do this. You didn't want to protect this abusive parent's rights, and they agreed.
It was a judicial bypass on that?
Well, there is, but the problem is it's creating a new cause of action, a civil cause of action. When they read this and realized the flaw in the bill, they said, we accept the amendment. And so it was accepted on a bipartisan basis. What we're trying to do is to make sure in conference that amendment's protected.
Senator Durbin, Barbara Popovich from CAN-TV. Just segue from energy to telecommunications. You and the senator looking at the Stevens bill now, which is another bill that won't bring down rates for consumers. And I know you believe in broadband deployment to every citizen in the state and free and open internet. Again, goals that won't be accomplished by this bill. So I'd like to know what you'll do to safeguard the public interest.
Well, this is a complicated bill and not likely to come before us before the end of the year. I'll be very blunt with you. And it has a lot of complex elements to it and how they relate to the telecommunications industry and its future. Senator Stevens is pretty headstrong, as you may know. I found out personally. So I don't think it's likely to come up before the end of the year, but I want to work with you on this bill. If I could use one reference that you made and just expand on it. There are several things that we're looking at our office, trying to look over the horizon for our state and economic opportunity, and one of those is broadband access. Currently, I'm from downstate, as you know, but currently in downstate we have two initiatives underway, one out of Rockford and one in southern Illinois, that involve about 40 counties in our state. They are trying to expand high-speed internet access, broadband access, to every corner of all of those counties to make sure that every business can use it, every health facility, every education facility. But smack dab in the middle, the sandwich of that state, our state, are about 50 counties that aren't in the program yet. So we're trying to push this broadband access forward. It means using the telephone companies, it means using cables and other sources so that we can do it. I think it's a key. You know, we talk about infrastructure, we still need them, roads and bridges and airports and the like, but the information infrastructure, the technology infrastructure is really going to be our key to economic success in this century. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Peter Scosi with the Metropolitan Planning Council. In regards to your energy policy, you certainly talked about how we might look towards reducing or increasing fuel efficiency. There seems that there might be a role for the federal government to actually even move away from the dependence on the automobile. It's not so much a dependence on oil, but it depends on the automobile. Certainly the federal government has a role in funding things like mass transit operations, which, as we've seen on the front page of the Tribune today, can enhance a person's commute, sometimes in negative ways as well, if we don't have a well-funded system that provides good, efficient operations. But the federal government certainly plays a role in funding that. Furthermore, people's land use decisions and where they choose to live, also illustrated on the front page of the Tribune today, suggest that we could reduce our dependency on oil and energy by growing a little more smartly, if you will. Are there roles for the federal government to address those objectives as well, and if so, how do they fit in with your energy?
I'm completely committed to mass transit. I believe that it's critical to get people off the roads and into trains and buses. I support Amtrak. This administration has not been friendly to it, but I think it's critical for our state to keep people off the highways. Emil can speak for Springfield, but I will tell you in Washington, the highway lobby is the most powerful lobby when it comes to transportation. And the first thing they take care of are the roads and bridges. And not to diminish their importance, but the mass transit efforts don't have the same political clout. And politically, they are generally based in large cities, which are generally Democratic. And we're dealing with a Republican Congress and Republican president. So we don't do as well when it comes to mass transit as I think we should. I think it's in the best interest not only of the cities and the suburbs, but all of us to have more mass transit, and I've tried to support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Senator. Peter LaBarber with the Illinois Family Institute. You were once strongly pro-life. In fact, I have here a copy of a letter you wrote in 1982 to a pro-life constituent, in which you said, "My record of opposition to abortion on demand has been public record for 8 years. Long before my opponent moved to this district, I worked closely with Springfield Right to Life and served as master of ceremonies at the annual banquet. I oppose abortion on demand. I support the Hatch federal amendment, which at that time stated that abortion was not a constitutional right, which has been endorsed by the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. My question is the Democratic Party prides itself on helping the little guy, and there are no more helpless little guys in the planet than unborn children. How do you explain your personal metamorphosis from somebody who strongly defended innocent unborn life as a Catholic to now becoming one of the strongest pro-abortion rights senators on Capitol Hill?"
Well, I thank you for your question, and we know the controversy associated with this issue. I am still opposed to abortion. If any woman in my family came to me and said she wanted to go have an abortion procedure, I would do everything in my power to talk her out of it, to help her carry that child to term, to either keep the child or put that child up for abortion. That's what I believe in my heart, and that's where it comes from. The obvious question is, though, what do you do about those extraordinary cases? Those situations of rape and incest, those extraordinary cases where an abortion procedure may be warranted. What I have decided when I came to Washington and found out that Right to Life was opposing efforts at family planning is that I don't think they have a realistic approach to this. I think you have to give women alternatives so that they can plan their lives and plan their families. I don't think that's inconsistent with my personal feelings. Now, when it comes to this issue, I know that there are many in this room we'll never agree on. We feel strongly one way or the other. But I think the bottom line is this: we ought to keep abortion safe and legal and do everything in our power to reduce the incidence of it. One of your friends earlier talked about the parental consent bill. We offered an amendment in the parental consent bill to try to have more education of adolescents to avoid unwanted, unplanned pregnancies and to encourage abstinence. It was defeated. It was defeated on the floor. It's a defeatist attitude for us to ignore the obvious. Children are sexually active far earlier than parents ever want them to be. And we have to deal with the reality of that situation too. So when I sat down with those who had been victims of rape and incest, as I did, looked into their eyes, I realized that I was in favor of exceptions which you probably don't agree with.
Durbin. My name is Sonia Dalton, and I am just an Illinois resident. I do volunteer work for some political ministry and church organizations in the state. I saw an article yesterday in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune that I found very troubling. Apparently, an Illinois resident by the name of Mike Campion was suspended by the Minneapolis Police Department. He's a psychologist, and they have suspended him because pro-homosexual activists have complained that he doesn't even presently, but he used to serve on the board of Illinois Family Institute. And I find it especially troubling because his work performance was praised less than a month ago. So it concerns me because I'm employed and I don't want to lose my right to exercise my freedom of speech and religion and so forth. And I'm wondering, as our senator, what can you do to protect the constitutional rights of Illinois citizens?
What I can do is not only address that issue, but many just like it. We are in a time in American history when our basic and fundamental liberties and freedoms are under attack. Whether it's the Patriot Act being taken too far, whether it's a federal government that is involved in warrantless wiretapping, whether it's a president who believes as commander-in-chief he does not have to follow the law, all of these things are infringing on our basic freedoms, whether it's the freedom of privacy, the basic right of privacy, or freedom of speech. My job is to stand up and speak out. Sometimes you may not like what you hear, but it comes down to the same issue. Do we value these basic freedoms? Do we value them enough to stand up even when it's uncomfortable and try to protect them? When the Republican majority decided to call for a consideration constitutional amendments in June, did anyone follow that debate? Now, I know some of you were delayed in getting here to the restaurant today because the billowing clouds of smoke by Chicagoans burning flags slowed you down. The fact is, it is not a national problem. And when they come forward and want to tamper with the handiwork of James Madison, who wrote that Bill of Rights, and to infringe on our basic right of expression, it's just plain wrong. So whether it's the freedom of expression of the individual you just mentioned or those who protest in a way that I find personally repugnant, we've all got to understand that what's at stake are our basic freedoms. Thank you.
Dick Marty Gleason, and I've been a member of the City Club for a long time, and I was in the construction equipment industry for 46 some years. I know the difficulties facing manufacturers when they sell abroad.
You sound like you might be a senior citizen too, Marty. Go ahead.
I don't want to admit it any more than you do. I've been your friend for most of that time too.
You sure have.
Nick, my good friend Bob Howery of Rotec Industries, whom you helped in a very difficult battle that he's been engaged in with the Chinese, where he sold a lot of equipment to them and serviced it and helped them build the Three Gorges Dam to come on stream a couple of years ahead of time at a savings of 11 to 15 million a day rather. They have taken him into a Chinese court over an accident that was probably staged in order to get even with him on some matters. And they got a judgment which was enforceable through UN treaties and through treaties that we subscribed to, no appeal, and they were able to enact those judgments in this country, which forced him to take Chapter 11, which is a very proud man, he didn't want to do. What can we do in terms of relations with the manufacturing base in this state that is going to be doing business, has to do business in China, that the Chinese will respect American law and American companies that do business there?
Marty, I believe in free trade and, as they say, fair trade, and voted for a number of trade agreements. The biggest disappointment I have is enforcement. When we set up standards and rules and laws and they're not enforced, it's not fair. It really creates a disadvantage for American businesses like the one that Bob represents and so many others. What happened to him, of course, is that he sold equipment in China. The Chinese took it apart and decided they'd make it themselves. They'd ignored his property rights in this same equipment, and he didn't have any court to protect him in China. And so we find this happening entirely too often. And if we are going to have free trade as we want it, and expanded global trade, then we certainly have to operate under the rule of law. And I think you've made a point. I just don't think that we are aggressive enough in enforcing our own laws and our own trade agreements. And unfortunately, the United States ends up being the loser time and again.
Thank you, Senator. Brian Israel with River North Residents Association. We're very pleased to welcome you to our neighborhood.
Thank you.
Whether it's Homeland Security or the Gulf Coast disaster or military operations overseas, hardly a week goes by without some stunning example of waste and mismanagement of public funds being revealed. I remember when Al Gore was sworn in, one of his hallmark initiatives was to go agency by agency and root out and eliminate waste and inefficiency. Is there anything similar going on in Congress to eliminate waste of public resources?
There's a good lesson in history here. 1942, there was an upstart senator from Missouri named Harry Truman. Harry Truman decided that he was concerned about waste and profiteering at a time when America was at war. It was a time when the Democrats controlled the Senate and the House and the White House with Franklin Roosevelt. Harry Truman created the Harry Truman Commission and started traveling all across the United States in his little car with a staffer, taking a look at these contractors that were supplying our World War II war effort, showing where there was waste and fraud and corruption and profiteering at the expense of American taxpayers and, more importantly, at the expense of American troops. Harry Truman is legendary for having led that fight, and it led to his being chosen as Franklin Roosevelt's running mate in 1944. He established something that really we hadn't paid close enough attention to, and that is the constitutional responsibility of Congress to engage in oversight, to hold every administration accountable. It's all about this balance of power that we have in this country and the three branches of government. I have to tell you that one of the saddest outcomes of a one-party control in Washington has been that oversight has been pushed to the back. Nobody's taken a close look at Halliburton. Nobody's taken a close look at KBR. The only hearings we've held are partisan hearings where the Democratic Policy Conference brings in whistleblowers who tell outrageous stories of taxpayers being ripped off and soldiers not receiving what they're supposed to overseas. It sounds a little partisan, maybe it is, but I think a little more balance in Washington would lead to more oversight. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Senator. I'm Malcolm Young from the John Howard Association, and I've been trying really hard to think of a quick segue from energy to prisons, and I can't. But my question has to do with the Pell Grants, which, as you well know, were federal grants for higher education for people in need of tuition assistance. And originally, a small percentage of those grants went to prisoners, inmates in state prisons. It was sufficient to bring in the faculty and staff from colleges and universities and provided a point of aspiration for many inmates. Some years back, Congress struck from the law the allowance for prisoners to receive these benefits, and as a result, in Illinois and many other states, combined with a change in ideology, a lot of education programs in prisons just evaporated. The bill's up for reconsideration. I'm wondering what you think the chances are for passage for an allowance for prisoners to receive that entitlement.
You know, I've thought about that vote a long time. I cast thousands, but I thought about that vote for a long, long time. Because here's what it came down to. Put yourself in my shoes for a minute, play the role of congressman. I was in the House at the time. You have a static pool, money that's available for Pell Grants in America. The amount of Pell Grants, which are given to students, the neediest students, hasn't increased in the last 6 or 7 years. It's about $4,015, Father, if I'm not mistaken. And so you have a lot of students going deeper and deeper in debt because they're borrowing more student loans because the Pell Grants don't come up and provide the scholarship or grant money that's free. It doesn't have any payback provisions to it. So at the same time, we were providing Pell Grants to those who were in prison in the state of Illinois, okay? And in the federal penitentiaries. And the argument was, wait a minute, we don't have enough money to give to the kids who didn't break the law, who are trying to get through college. We're increasing their indebtedness while you give Pell Grants to those who broke the law, Senator? Think about that vote for a minute. And think about it in the context the John Howard Association can tell you that if you want to stop that person released from prison from committing another crime, the most important thing, one of the most important things, educate him. Teach him, give him a GED, give him some advanced degree, and then, of course, help him to assimilate back into society. So that was the dilemma we faced, and we still face. The Pell Grant's been frozen. More indebtedness for the students, and yet we have more and more people incarcerated and a higher recidivism rate because we're not putting the money in the schools. I'm tired of these zero-sum situations where you have to take from one to give to the other. I have a different view on how we ought to be prioritizing things in America. It strikes me that we ought to be realistic, that if we don't want another crime, another victim, another incarceration at great expense to America, we have got to move forward to help educate those in prison. I also think we've got to raise these Pell Grants. And you said, well, Senator, you've just argued it both ways. I have. I think we need both. And I'm sorry that we were put in this choice where we had to pick one or the other. I really do believe we need both. Maybe, just maybe, with this broadband access and more distance learning, we can bring education into our penal institutions and give those who truly want to turn their lives around a chance to do it at a lower cost so we won't have to incur these high expenses.
I'm just wondering, as we go forward with trying to set a new course of immigration enforcement, what can you do to prevent the abuses in the workplace by employers of either their use of H-1B visas or not checking status? Thank you.
Big question. I could have given my speech on that question alone in terms of what we do with immigration. H-1B visas concern me. The major companies, Bill Gates comes and sits down across the table from me and says, we need more talent. If you don't let me bring the talent to the United States, I'll move the work overseas, and I don't want to do that. So let me bring that talent to the United States. We're not graduating enough computer scientists at the level that I need for my business. India's doing it. We want to bring those into our country. It's a pretty compelling argument. But at the same time, we understand that there have been abuses. Many of these H-1B visa holders are brought over here and aren't treated very well. They aren't paid very well either. And there is abuse that takes place. I think the bottom line answer to this is the same as when you're dealing with the nursing shortage or the doctor shortage in America. We have got to deal with homegrown answers to these problems. I just went around the state on our nursing shortage. And we have a terrible nursing shortage coming up in America. In 15 years, we'll be short 1 million nurses. If we doubled the enrollment at nursing schools today, we still wouldn't reach that extra million figure that we need. So it just shows you where we are. And last year, we turned down 1,900 qualified nursing student applicants at our universities in Illinois. Instead, we imported them from other countries. We have got to grow this talent at home here, and we've got to start doing it by increasing nursing school facilities and technical facilities, putting more money into science and math. It isn't going to happen automatically. So I didn't answer your question directly, but I think the whole issue of H-1Bs is evidence of the fact that in many specialties important for our future, we are really poaching the world. We're going after poorer places and bringing in people here to do that work.
Just one quick follow-up. In my experience working at several area medical centers, there's been a concern that's addressed many times, perhaps not publicly, and that is the purpose of the H-1B visa was to train, for example, foreign physicians here in the United States so that they may return to the country and provide Americanized standard of medicine. However, there's a concern that those same people are not actually returning.
Well, let me say this. I'm the son of an immigrant. And so I'm not going to say that immigration is wrong or bad, and it's a natural human instinct to improve your life and the life of your family by moving to another place. And I think that's why America is so great today. But I think we have to acknowledge the obvious, and that is we are taking people away from many parts of the world where they're desperately needed. If avian flu should strike, it's estimated we have 21 days from discovery to stop it from circling the world. And so that means there has to be a nurse and a doctor and a public health facility in that country too. So it's a complicated issue. One of the things that I'm trying to do is to encourage, for example, in the nursing field, more and more homegrown professionals by those coming out of the military signing up to be nursing professors, which we desperately need. Next question, please.
Dan Miller, business editor at the Chicago Sun-Times. Senator Coburn has introduced a bill in the U.S. Senate that would create a database that would allow citizens to do a search, a record search of earmarks, special spending bills, all of these special kinds of legislation that is resulting in spending that's completely out of control in the U.S. Congress. That bill is being held up through a parliamentary maneuver called a hold. And a single senator or group of senators can secretly put a hold on that bill to prevent it from coming to the floor for a vote. 15 senators, at least at my last count, have identified themselves as not being that senator or among those senators.
16, I'm not holding it.
That's my question to you, Senator. Are you that senator?
No, I'm not holding it. And I do believe that amendment was offered as an amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill, which will pass when we get back. So I think it's going to move forward. I support disclosure. Complete disclosure. And I also have to say a word about earmarks. I've been on appropriations committees for a long time. When I was elected, people said, why does Illinois rank 49th out of 50 states when it comes to federal money coming home? Why don't you do a better job making sure our tax dollars come back to help our state? And so I went out there and did my level best and continue to on the appropriations committee to bring money to the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois from one end to the other. But the money that I bring is in clear and precise earmarks. You can see it. You read my name, you read the amount of money, and you read the express purpose that it's going to be spent for. What I object to, and I don't know if Senator Coburn goes this far, is the fact that if somebody wants to help a special interest group, they don't have to put in an earmark. All they have to do is change the punctuation in the tax code. And they do that. And no fingerprints, no paper trail, there it's done. So if Senator Coburn wants to go for complete disclosure, I want to include those little tricks as well. The asbestos bill. A controversial bill was worth $1 billion. $1 billion to one company in Chicago. Is that an earmark? Pretty close. And is there disclosure of that? None at all. I think if it's going to be disclosure to the American people, it should be complete disclosure. And let me segue to another totally related issue I haven't even discussed today. If we want to change this government and restore our confidence in it, we've got to change the way we finance campaigns. You just cannot have these multi-million-dollar campaigns that require people to go hat in hand to their best friends and special interest groups. And this room is filled with my contributors, and I thank you all from the bottom of my heart. But I really believe public financing is the answer to earmarks and the corruption that unfortunately is starting to be pervasive in Washington. Yes.
I'm Joyce Saxon. I'm on the board of City Club. Returning to the subject under discussion today, energy, I spent a lot of time in the California desert. That's Rancho Mirage in Palm Springs and Palm Desert in Indio. And the bus system there, it's called SunBus, is the most wonderful system. It runs on natural gas. And you can stand in back of a bus if you don't faint from the emissions. Is there any hope for us for natural gas?
There is, and we're using natural gas, but it's experimental demonstration projects in buses around the state. I think we can do more and more. Moving toward cleaner fuels, I actually, a month ago, got into a Honda, a hydrogen-powered Honda, and drove it around Capitol Hill. The only emission, water at the end of the day. And they think they can produce the hydrogen with solar panels so that it won't be costly in the production of the hydrogen as well. So there are lots of alternatives, but natural gas is one of the immediate ones. Thank you. Last question.
Senator, my name is Ronald Wild. I'm a constituent. I have two quick questions. One, will you please run for president?
I guess Tom Roser's not here today. I didn't hear. Okay, go ahead.
Two, we're approaching September 11th, 2006. We've spent billions of dollars, and yet 99% of what comes into this country by sea or even by air is not inspected. When will the Democrats all come together to force the Republicans to do something about that problem?
Well, I think it's a serious problem. And the 9/11 Commission, which was a bipartisan commission, Governor Keene, Republican of New Jersey, and Lee Hamilton, Democrat of Indiana, maybe did the greatest service I've seen in recent memory to our country in producing a report that analyzed what happened on 9/11 and came up with specific recommendations. And they didn't quit. They come back every 6 months and give us a report card. And guess what? We're still failing. We're still failing to put together the things that are basic. You saw the picture in the Tribune a few days ago where I went with Mayor Daley to this emergency management center. It's the only one of its kind in America. There's nothing like it. This city took the money for Homeland Security, invested it in infrastructure and technology and communications so that we are better prepared where we stand right here for, God forbid, another disaster than virtually any city in the United States. We need to make sure our federal government is moving us in that same direction, and those recommendations give us a blueprint so that we have the communication system, that we really have the inspection on port facilities and chemical facilities and protection at nuclear facilities all across our state. I just don't think we're doing enough, and whether it's partisan or not, I think it should be an issue in this campaign. The last thing I'll say about the presidential run, I guess the City Club's the best place to make this announcement. Is that okay, Jay? I would just say that I would like to announce that Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon and I have co-founded what we call the Designated Drivers Caucus in the United States Senate. We believe it is our job to continue to drive the Senate forward while the back seat is filled with our colleagues intoxicated with the idea of being president. Nice to see you.